The phone rang at 6:37 in the morning, jerking me from restless sleep. Mrs. Patterson's voice trembled through the receiver. "Mia, that golden retriever at Daniel's place has been howling for 3 days straight. Nobody's home, and I think something's terribly wrong." I threw on clothes and drove 3 hours to my son's house, finding Tucker scratching frantically at the fence corner, ribs showing through matted fur. When I followed his desperate lead and dug where he clawed, my hands struck metal. Inside a waterproof container lay my deceased husband Robert's Purple Heart medal, wedding ring, and handwritten love letters. My son had moved away in secret, abandoning his dog and burying evidence of stealing from his father's estate. I sat on Daniel's front steps, cradling the container that held pieces of Robert's soul while Tucker pressed against my legs. Seeking comfort, I barely possessed myself. The Purple Heart felt cold in my palm, its weight carrying memories of Robert's stories about Vietnam, about the buddies who never came home, about earning this medal by carrying wounded soldiers through enemy fire. Daniel knew every detail of those stories. He'd sat wide-eyed as a little boy, asking his daddy to tell them again and again. Tucker whimpered and nudged toward the house, leading me through the unlocked back door. The silence inside felt wrong, like a held breath. In Robert's office, where my husband had spent countless evenings organizing his collections and writing letters to veteran friends, every file cabinet drawer hung open, emptied. Papers scattered across the floor told a different story than Daniel's helpful visits after the funeral 18 months ago. I gathered the discarded receipts with shaking hands. Miller's Pawn Shop, $300 for vintage military items. Peterson's Gold Exchange, $800 for inherited jewelry collection. Tucker watched me piece together the timeline, his intelligent brown eyes reflecting an understanding that made my chest ache. My son had systematically stripped away everything Robert treasured while I grieved, telling me he was organizing Dad's things to help you heal. The coin collection that Robert assembled over 40 years, gone, sold to Sacramento coin dealers for $1,200. The antique tools Robert inherited from his grandfather, pawned for $400 at Valley Collectibles. Each receipt felt like a slap, showing how Daniel reduced his father's lifetime of careful collecting to quick cash transactions. I found Daniel's notebook hidden beneath scattered bank statements, his handwriting cataloging every valuable item with estimated prices. Dad's war medals, probably $500. Tool collection, maybe $800. Mom's jewelry, could get $2,000. He'd calculated the worth of our lives together like inventory in a liquidation sale. Tucker followed me to Robert's gun safe, where I discovered another violation. The heavy metal door stood open, revealing empty shelves except for a handwritten note claiming donated to local veterans group. I called Veterans of Foreign Wars immediately. They had no record of any donation from Daniel. Another lie added to the growing pile. The kitchen revealed Tucker's suffering. His food bowls were bone dry, kibble scattered across the floor, as if he desperately tried to lick up every crumb. I filled his water bowl, watching him drink frantically while guilt twisted in my stomach. How long had he been alone? How many times had he heard my son's footsteps and hoped for food that never came? In the living room, I found Daniel's computer still plugged in, abandoned in his haste to disappear. The browser history revealed searches for pawn shops, coin dealers, and military memorabilia buyers. But more disturbing were the legal websites he'd visited. How to gain power of attorney for elderly parent, signs of dementia in older adults, estate planning for incapacitated relatives. Tucker settled beside me as I scrolled through Daniel's emails, finding correspondence with buyers interested in estate items from deceased veteran. He'd used Robert's death as a selling point, claiming emotional urgency to justify quick sales at reduced prices. One email to a metal collector made my stomach turn. Need to sell fast. Mom doesn't know about Dad's collection and I want to spare her the pain of dealing with it. The cruelest discovery came in Daniel's desk drawer. A spare key to my house, attached to a list of items he planned to help organize next. My grandmother's china, Robert's dress uniforms. The savings bonds Robert bought for our golden anniversary. Still years away. Daniel had mapped out the complete plunder of everything we'd built together. As afternoon shadows lengthened, I realized the true scope of betrayal went far beyond stolen objects. Daniel had begun this campaign while Robert lay dying in the hospital, visiting our home to check on things while I maintained bedside vigils. He'd exploited my grief, my trust, and my desperate need for family support during the darkest period of my life. Tucker's gentle pressure against my knee reminded me that we both needed food. I drove to the nearest grocery store, buying dog food and supplies while processing the magnitude of Daniel's deception. The cashier's friendly chatter felt surreal against the backdrop of discovering my son's systematic theft. Back at the house, Tucker ate ravenously while I examined Robert's empty desk one more time. Hidden beneath a loose drawer bottom, I found more papers that made my blood freeze. Bank documents bore signatures that looked like mine, but felt wrong somehow. As I studied them more carefully, the horrible truth became clear. Daniel had forged my signature on a power of attorney document, giving himself legal access to Robert's estate accounts. Dawn broke gray and cold as Tucker and I drove toward First National Bank, where Robert had maintained accounts for 37 years. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the forged power of attorney documents burning in my purse, like evidence of a crime I'd somehow committed against myself. Tucker sat in the passenger seat, alert and protective, as if he understood we were heading into battle. Sarah Morrison, the bank manager who'd helped us refinance our mortgage years ago, greeted me with professional warmth that quickly shifted to concern. Her corner office overlooked Main Street, where Robert used to park his pickup truck every Friday to deposit his pension checks. The familiarity of the setting made the revelations that followed feel even more violating. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so glad Daniel brought you in," Sarah said, pulling up account information on her computer screen. "We've been concerned about the large withdrawals, but Daniel assured us you were aware and approved everything." My confusion must have shown clearly because Sarah's expression changed immediately. "You did approve the withdrawals, didn't you? Daniel said you were having trouble managing the paperwork since Robert passed." The words hit like physical blows. $87,000. Gone from Robert's estate account over the past 14 months. Daniel had withdrawn money in carefully calculated amounts, never taking enough at once to trigger automatic reviews, but systematically draining the account that represented Robert's lifetime of careful saving. Tucker pressed closer to my legs as Sarah pulled up transaction records, her face growing pale as she realized something was terribly wrong. The withdrawals began just 3 weeks after Robert's funeral, when I could barely function enough to make coffee, let alone monitor bank accounts. Daniel had struck while I was most vulnerable, most trusting, most desperate for his help navigating the administrative maze of death. "He told us you were becoming forgetful," Sarah whispered, scrolling through months of transactions. "Daniel said you'd asked him to handle the finances because keeping track was becoming overwhelming for you. He seemed so concerned, so caring. We thought he was being a wonderful son." The security footage Sarah showed me was worse than the numbers. Daniel walked confidently through the bank lobby, chatting easily with tellers who knew our family. He signed documents with practiced ease, his demeanor relaxed and entitled. In one particularly painful clip, he laughed at something a teller said while withdrawing $7,000 of my money. Sarah's voice grew smaller as she revealed more details. Daniel had also liquidated Robert's retirement bonds, claiming I needed immediate cash for medical expenses. He'd told the investment advisor that I was too emotional to handle the transaction myself, painting himself as the responsible son protecting his grieving mother from financial stress. The retirement bonds were worth $43,000, Sarah said, her professional composure cracking. "Daniel said you specifically requested they be cashed because you were worried about market volatility affecting your security. I thought about the expensive vacation Daniel had given me for my 68th birthday, insisting I deserved something special after everything you've been through. The cruise to Alaska, the fancy hotel rooms, the shopping excursions he'd encouraged, all paid for with money he'd stolen from my own accounts. The generosity I'd been so grateful for was actually my own stolen savings being returned to me like scraps from a rich man's table." Tucker's warmth against my legs provided the only comfort in Sarah's cold office as she continued revealing the scope of Daniel's deception. He'd convinced bank employees that I was showing early signs of dementia, that my grief had made me paranoid and suspicious. He'd painted himself as the patient, devoted son, shouldering the burden of caring for an increasingly difficult mother. "He said you'd started talking about Robert as if he were still alive," Sarah admitted, avoiding my eyes. "Daniel claimed you were having conversations with empty rooms and forgetting recent events. We thought we were helping by allowing him to handle the financial matters." The most devastating revelation came when Sarah showed me mortgage applications Daniel had submitted using fraudulent documents. He'd attempted to take out a second mortgage on the house. Robert and I had paid off completely, forging my signature and claiming I needed funds for long-term care expenses. Only a computer glitch in the system had delayed processing, preventing him from stealing my home along with everything else. The loan officer noted that your signature looked shaky, which Daniel explained was due to arthritis and stress, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. He had medical documentation supporting his claims about your declining mental state. Medical documentation. My mind raced, wondering where Daniel could have obtained official-looking papers about mental health conditions I didn't have. Then I remembered Cheryl, Daniel's new girlfriend who worked as a nurse. I'd only met her briefly at a family barbecue, but Daniel had mentioned her medical background several times, usually in the context of her helping assess my well-being after Robert's death. Tucker whined softly, sensing my rising distress as the pieces of Daniel's elaborate scheme clicked into place. This wasn't impulsive theft or desperate financial need. This was calculated, methodical exploitation orchestrated over months with professional assistance and careful planning. Sarah printed copies of all transactions, her hands shaking slightly as she stacked the papers. Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry. If we'd known Daniel was lying about your condition, we never would have allowed these transactions. The bank has protocols for protecting elderly customers, but Daniel circumvented them by claiming to act on your behalf with proper authorization. As we left the bank, Tucker close at my side, I realized Daniel's theft went far beyond money. He'd stolen my reputation, convincing people who'd known me for decades that I was becoming incompetent. He'd stolen my autonomy, making financial decisions that affected my security without my knowledge. Most painfully, he'd stolen my trust in my own judgment, making me question whether I really had been as sharp as I thought during those difficult months after Robert's death. The drive home felt endless, with Tucker occasionally placing his paw on my arm as if offering encouragement. I thought about calling my sister Janet, but Daniel's words echoed in my memory, claims about my deteriorating mental state, suggestions that I needed supervision, implications that my grief had damaged my ability to think clearly. What other lies had Daniel spread? How many people in my life now saw me as a fragile, confused widow instead of the competent woman I'd always been? The violation felt complete and suffocating, but as Tucker leaned against me at a red light, his steady presence reminded me of something important. Daniel had underestimated both of us. He'd abandoned Tucker, assuming no one would care about a starving dog. He'd buried evidence of his theft, confident it would never be discovered. He'd built his scheme on lies, never considering that truth had a way of surfacing when least expected. Sarah had promised to flag all my accounts and contact law enforcement about the forged signatures. But I knew this was just the beginning. If Daniel had lied to the bank so extensively, what other institutions had he manipulated? What other people believed his carefully constructed fiction about his declining, incompetent mother? As I pulled into my driveway, Tucker alert and protective beside me, I realized that uncovering the truth about Daniel's crimes might require confronting lies that reached far deeper into my life than I'd ever imagined. Tucker and I had barely settled into my kitchen when I realized I needed to know how far Daniel's lies had spread through our family. My sister Janet lived just 2 towns over, and we'd spoken regularly since Robert's death, but something in her recent conversations had felt different, distant, carefully neutral in a way that seemed unnatural for someone who'd been my closest confidant for 72 years. I dialed Janet's number while Tucker stationed himself by my feet, his protective instincts apparently extending to emotional support during difficult phone calls. Janet answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that immediately confirmed my suspicions. "Mia, how nice to hear from you. I was just thinking we should get together soon. Are you taking care of yourself? Eating properly? Daniel mentioned you've been having some rough patches lately." The words felt like ice water. Rough patches. As if my grief over losing my husband of 46 years was a character flaw rather than normal human emotion. "Janet, what exactly did Daniel tell you about these rough patches?" Silence stretched between us before Janet's voice returned, smaller and more hesitant. "He's just worried about you, honey. You've been through so much, and sometimes grief can affect people in ways they don't realize. Daniel said you've been talking to Robert like he's still there, forgetting conversations, getting confused about dates." Each word felt like a betrayal, not just from Daniel, but from my own sister, who'd known me since birth and should have recognized lies about my mental state. Tucker pressed harder against my legs as my voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. Janet, I need you to tell me everything Daniel said. All of it. The story that emerged made me sick to my stomach. Daniel had called Janet 6 months ago, claiming he was concerned about Mom's declining mental state. He'd provided specific examples, finding me having conversations with empty rooms, discovering unpaid bills scattered around the house, catching me putting milk in the pantry and cereal in the refrigerator. All lies. All carefully crafted to paint a picture of cognitive decline that would justify his increasing involvement in my affairs. He said you'd gotten angry when he tried to help organize Dad's things, Janet continued, her voice growing more uncertain as she spoke. Daniel claimed you accused him of trying to steal from you, which seemed so paranoid. We thought maybe the stress was affecting your judgment. The cruel genius of Daniel's manipulation became clear. He'd used my natural protective feelings about Robert's belongings as evidence of irrationality. My perfectly reasonable desire to handle my husband's effects at my own pace had been twisted into proof of mental instability. Janet, who is we? Who else has Daniel talked to about this? The list made my heart sink. Marcus, my nephew who managed a hardware store in Sacramento, had been told I was hiding money around the house and becoming paranoid about family members trying to take advantage of me. Daniel had suggested Marcus keep his distance because I might make accusations against him too. Cousin Linda, Robert's brother's daughter who lived in Oregon, had received calls describing my increasingly erratic behavior. Daniel claimed I'd called him at 3 in the morning, confused about where I was and unable to remember how to operate my coffee maker. Even worse, Daniel had reached out to Robert's army buddies, telling them I was struggling emotionally and making poor decisions about his military memorabilia. He'd convinced them that I wanted to sell Robert's medals and uniforms because I couldn't bear having reminders around the house. We were planning an intervention, Janet admitted quietly. Daniel suggested we all get together to discuss the best way to help you. He'd researched some nice assisted living facilities and thought maybe a gentle transition would be better than waiting until you really couldn't take care of yourself. Tucker whined softly as I processed the scope of Daniel's campaign. He hadn't just stolen my money and possessions. He'd systematically destroyed my relationships and reputation to justify his theft. Every person who loved me had been turned into an unwitting accomplice in his plan to control my life. What kind of intervention? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Daniel had organized a family meeting scheduled for next weekend, conveniently timed after he'd planned to complete his theft and disappear. He'd prepared detailed documentation of my declining condition, complete with photos of a supposedly messy house and medical opinions from his girlfriend Cheryl about my obvious cognitive issues. The photos were particularly devastating. Daniel had apparently staged scenes in my house during his visits, scattering papers around my desk and taking pictures to support his claims that I couldn't keep track of important documents. He'd photographed dishes in my sink after holiday meals, presenting them as evidence that I could no longer maintain basic hygiene. He seemed so worried about you, Mia, Janet said, her voice breaking slightly. Daniel said you'd refused to see a doctor about your memory problems, and that we might need to get legal guardianship to protect you from making dangerous financial decisions. Legal guardianship. The words hit like physical blows. Daniel had been laying groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent, positioning himself as the responsible family member who should control my assets and decisions. The theft of my money was just the beginning. He'd been planning to steal my entire independence. I called Marcus next, discovering that Daniel had been even more manipulative with him. He said you were getting paranoid about the government, Aunt Mia. Something about thinking people were watching the house and trying to break in. Daniel was really concerned because you'd started checking locks multiple times and calling the police about suspicious cars in the neighborhood. None of this had happened, but the lies contained just enough plausible detail to sound credible. Daniel knew I'd always been security conscious since a break-in in our neighborhood years ago, and he'd twisted that awareness into evidence of paranoid delusion. Daniel also mentioned you'd started hoarding items, Marcus continued. He said your house was getting cluttered with things you wouldn't let anyone touch, and that you'd gotten angry when he tried to help clean up. The manipulation was brilliant and evil. Daniel had taken my natural desire to keep Robert's belongings and transformed it into evidence of hoarding behavior. My grief-driven protectiveness over my husband's things had been weaponized against me. Tucker's steady presence provided the only comfort as I continued making calls, discovering the full extent of Daniel's lies. He'd convinced my church congregation that I needed gentle monitoring because I'd become confused during services, forgetting where I'd parked or what time events were scheduled. Father Mackenzie, our pastor for 15 years, had apparently received several concerned calls from Daniel about my spiritual crisis. Daniel claimed I'd become angry with God over Robert's death and was saying things that worried him about my faith and mental stability. Every relationship in my life had been poisoned by Daniel's calculated deception. People who'd known me for decades had been convinced I was losing my mind, all to create the perfect conditions for him to steal everything I owned. The final call was to Linda in Oregon, who revealed the most chilling detail of all. Daniel said you'd started talking about changing your will, Mia. He was worried you might leave everything to animal charities, or something impulsive like that, because you weren't thinking clearly. He thought maybe we should talk to a lawyer about protecting the family interests. Protecting the family interests. Daniel had positioned his theft as a noble effort to preserve inheritance that I might give away in a moment of grief-induced irrationality. He'd turned my family into accomplices in his crime by convincing them they were protecting me from myself. As darkness fell and Tucker settled beside my chair, I realized that Daniel's betrayal extended far beyond stolen money or abandoned animals. He'd stolen my identity, my relationships, and my reputation, replacing them with a fictional narrative that painted me as incompetent and dangerous. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed his lies would never be challenged, that no one would think to verify his claims or question his motives. He'd counted on my family's love for me to make them vulnerable to his manipulation, never considering that the same love might eventually lead them back to the truth. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming not just my stolen assets, but my stolen life, and Tucker would be right beside me every step of the way. The next morning brought a discovery that turned my blood to ice. While Tucker explored the backyard where he'd been abandoned, I returned to Daniel's house to search more thoroughly through the paperwork he'd left behind. Hidden in a bedroom closet, beneath old tax returns and utility bills, I found a manila folder marked C's Notes that revealed the true scope of what I was facing. Cheryl Martinez, Daniel's girlfriend of 8 months, wasn't just a casual accomplice. She was the architect of the entire scheme. The folder contained detailed handwritten notes in a feminine script, outlining what could only be described as a manual for elder abuse. Page after page of psychological manipulation techniques, legal loopholes, and medical terminology designed to make elderly victims appear incompetent. This wasn't Daniel's desperate financial grab. This was a professional operation. Tucker returned to my side as I spread the papers across Daniel's kitchen table. His warm presence, the only thing keeping me grounded as I read through Cheryl's methodical planning. Her notes began 8 months ago, shortly after she'd started dating Daniel and learned about Robert's recent death. Target assessment: Mia Chen, age 68, recent widow, substantial estate including house, savings, and military memorabilia. Son Daniel has access and trust. Emotional vulnerability high due to grief. Limited family oversight. Perfect candidate for cognitive decline narrative. The clinical language made my skin crawl. Cheryl had evaluated me like a predator, sizing up prey, identifying my vulnerabilities, and plotting how to exploit them. She'd met me exactly once, at that family barbecue, and had apparently spent the entire afternoon cataloging information about my life, my relationships, and my assets. Her background research was thorough and chilling. She'd looked up Robert's military service record, finding details about his medals and commendations that Daniel had shared during casual conversation. She'd researched the value of military memorabilia, identifying specific items in our home that would bring the highest prices. She'd even obtained information about my banking habits and investment accounts through Daniel's access to our family papers. But the most disturbing sections dealt with her medical expertise. Cheryl had been fired from her previous nursing job at Sacramento General Hospital for falsifying patient records, something I learned from a termination letter tucked into the folder. She'd been caught altering medication logs and mental status assessments to support insurance fraud, but had avoided criminal charges through a plea agreement that included surrendering her nursing license. Her notes revealed how she'd coached Daniel to use medical terminology when describing my supposed cognitive decline. Use specific examples, she'd written. Don't just say forgetful. Say unable to recall recent conversations. Repeatedly asking same questions. Confusion about familiar tasks. Medical professionals respond to concrete symptoms, not vague complaints. Cheryl had provided Daniel with a checklist of behaviors that would indicate dementia or cognitive impairment, teaching him how to fabricate convincing examples for banks, family members, and medical professionals. She'd researched the legal requirements for declaring someone mentally incompetent, mapping out the exact steps needed to gain guardianship over my affairs. The financial planning was equally detailed. Cheryl had calculated the total value of Robert's estate down to the penny, identifying the most efficient methods for liquidating assets without triggering investigations. She'd researched pawn shops and collectors who wouldn't ask too many questions about provenance, creating a network of buyers ready to purchase stolen items quickly and quietly. Phase 1. Establish narrative of cognitive decline through family manipulation. I read aloud, my voice shaking. Phase 2. Document behavioral evidence through staged incidents and medical consultation. Phase 3. Initiate guardianship proceedings while liquidating portable assets. Phase 4. Transfer real estate and remaining accounts. Tucker pressed against my legs as I discovered the most horrifying part of their plan. Phase 4 included specific instructions for isolating me from potential witnesses and allies. They'd researched memory care facilities in distant counties, planning to move me far from anyone who knew me well enough to question their narrative. Cheryl's percentage of the stolen funds was clearly documented. She'd negotiated 25% of all proceeds in exchange for her professional consultation services. Daniel's financial desperation had made him vulnerable to her expertise, but Cheryl was the predator who'd turned his weakness into a weapon against me. The medical aspects of their fraud were particularly sophisticated. Cheryl had stolen prescription pads from the hospital before her termination, using them to create fake documentation supporting claims about my mental health. She'd forged signatures from psychiatrists and neurologists, creating an entire medical history of cognitive decline that existed only on paper. Her notes included specific instructions for Daniel's interactions with bank personnel. Appear concerned, but resigned. Use phrases like, "We've been dealing with this for months, and the doctors say it's progressive." Never seem eager or impatient. Project image of devoted son making difficult decisions. The manipulation extended to my family as well. Cheryl had researched each relative individually, identifying their personalities and relationships with me to determine the most effective approach for each person. She'd known Janet would respond to appeals about my safety, while Marcus would be more concerned about financial irresponsibility. She'd crafted different versions of the same lies to match each family member's specific vulnerabilities. But the folder's most devastating contents dealt with their backup plans. If the cognitive decline narrative failed to provide sufficient legal cover for their theft, Cheryl had outlined alternative strategies. Medical emergencies that could be staged, accidents that could be arranged, methods for making me disappear entirely while maintaining plausible deniability. Tucker's sudden alertness drew my attention to a noise outside. A car was pulling into Daniel's driveway, and my heart stopped when I recognized the vehicle. Daniel and Cheryl had returned. I gathered the papers quickly, stuffing them into my purse while Tucker growled low in his throat. Through the kitchen window, I watched Daniel and a woman I'd only met briefly examining the backyard where Tucker had been digging. They looked panicked, searching the ground frantically for something they expected to find. Cheryl was smaller than I remembered, with auburn hair and the kind of professional appearance that would make people trust her medical opinions. She wore scrubs, probably coming from whatever job she'd found after losing her nursing license. Her movements were quick and nervous as she pointed toward the fence where Tucker had been scratching. "The container's gone," I heard Daniel say through the partially open window. "Someone found it. This is bad, Cheryl. This is really bad." They'd come back for the buried evidence, probably realizing they'd made a mistake by leaving it behind in their rush to disappear. But finding Tucker gone and the container missing had clearly terrified them. "We need to check the house," Cheryl replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions under pressure. "If someone's been here, we need to know what they might have found." Tucker and I slipped out the back door quietly, making our way to my car through the neighbor's yard. As we drove away, I watched Daniel and Cheryl enter the house through my rearview mirror, their body language screaming panic and desperation. The drive home gave me time to process what I'd learned. This wasn't just theft or even elder abuse. Cheryl's notes had revealed references to previous projects and other clients, suggesting that I wasn't her first victim. She was running an organized criminal enterprise, using her medical background to identify and exploit vulnerable elderly people. The folder had also contained contact information for other potential targets, including Cheryl's own elderly aunt, who'd recently inherited substantial property after her husband's death. The same patterns were being repeated, establishing relationships with family members who had access, gathering information about assets and vulnerabilities, preparing to launch another campaign of manipulation and theft. As Tucker and I reached home, I realized that stopping Daniel and Cheryl wasn't just about recovering my stolen assets or protecting my own life. There were other victims, past and future, who needed justice. Cheryl's clinical approach to elder abuse represented a systematic threat to every vulnerable older person in her orbit. But I also knew that taking on professional criminals would require more than just evidence and determination. I needed allies, resources, and a plan that could match their sophistication. The stakes had suddenly become much higher than my personal situation. Tucker settled beside my chair as I began making lists, his presence reminding me that even abandoned and neglected, he'd never given up hope. Neither would I. 3 days later, while Tucker napped in a patch of afternoon sunlight streaming through my kitchen window, I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I understood about Daniel and Cheryl's crimes. Hidden deep in Cheryl's notes, filed under Final Solutions, were detailed plans that went far beyond theft and fraud. They were planning to kill me. My hands trembled as I read through the meticulously planned murder scheme, written in Cheryl's precise handwriting with the same clinical detachment she'd applied to psychological manipulation and financial fraud. The folder contained medication charts, dosage calculations, and timeline projections that outlined exactly how they intended to end my life while making it appear natural. Subject exhibits classic risk factors for cardiac event, Cheryl had written. Recent major stressor, husband's death. Age-appropriate health concerns, family history of heart disease. Digitalis overdose would present as natural heart failure, especially given grief-related stress factors. Digitalis, a heart medication that could be lethal in higher doses. Cheryl had researched the drug extensively, noting that it occurred naturally in foxglove plants and would be difficult to detect in standard autopsy procedures unless specifically tested. She'd calculated the exact amount needed to cause fatal cardiac arrhythmia in a woman of my age and weight. The murder was scheduled for 2 weeks after Robert's estate finished clearing probate, when Daniel would inherit everything legally. Cheryl's notes contained a detailed timeline: wait for estate settlement, establish alibi, administer medication during routine visit, discovery of body after appropriate interval, grief-stricken son inherits clean estate. Tucker stirred at my feet as I read about the practice runs they'd already conducted. Daniel's recent visits, bringing healthy smoothies and vitamin supplements to help me through my grief, had been test cases for drug delivery. They'd given me mild sedatives, monitoring my reactions and adjusting dosages while I unknowingly participated in rehearsals for my own murder. Trial run 3 successful, Cheryl had noted after Daniel's visit 2 weeks ago. Subject showed appropriate drowsiness, 30 minutes post-ingestion, no suspicion. Final dose calculation confirmed. I remembered that visit clearly now. Daniel had been unusually attentive, staying for hours and insisting I drink the entire strawberry smoothie he'd brought. I'd felt tired afterward, assuming it was emotional exhaustion from discussing Robert's belongings. Instead, I'd been drugged by my own son as preparation for my planned execution. The medical supplies were already in place. Cheryl had stolen syringes, IV equipment, and pharmaceutical-grade digitalis from her various healthcare jobs before her termination. She'd stockpiled enough materials for multiple attempts, planning backup methods in case the initial murder failed. Their alternative plan was even more chilling. If the digitalis approach didn't work or aroused suspicion, they'd stage an accidental fall down the stairs. Cheryl's notes included detailed analysis of head trauma patterns and the specific injuries that would result from different types of falls. She'd researched how to position my body to make the accident appear genuine. Basement stairs optimal for trauma severity, she'd written. Concrete floor ensures fatal impact. Staged slip could be attributed to grief-related disorientation or medication side effects from legitimate prescriptions. The psychological aspect of their planning was perhaps the most horrifying element. They discussed how to react to my death with appropriate grief, practicing Daniel's response to finding my body and coaching him on the right level of emotion to display. Cheryl had researched typical family dynamics during sudden loss, teaching Daniel how to behave like a bereaved son rather than a murderer. Remember to call 911 immediately, but speak slowly due to shock, her notes instructed. Mention recent depression and forgetfulness to support natural causes narrative. Emphasize close relationship and recent concern about mother's well-being. The folder contained audio recordings of Daniel practicing these calls, his voice artificially strained with fake grief as he reported finding my body. Listening to my son rehearse my death with calculated sorrow was almost unbearable. The recordings revealed how thoroughly they'd prepared for every aspect of the murder and cover-up. Cheryl had even researched funeral arrangements, identifying mortuaries that offered expedited services for families wanting quick closure. She'd calculated inheritance tax implications and researched the fastest methods for transferring assets after my death. My murder wasn't just planned, it was scheduled into their broader financial timeline. The evidence revealed that this wasn't their first attempt at murder. References to Portland Project and Sacramento Completion suggested they'd successfully killed other elderly victims. Cheryl's notes contained refinements based on lessons learned from previous executions, indicating that murdering vulnerable seniors was an established part of their criminal enterprise. Portland's subject required increased dosage due to tolerance, she'd noted. Sacramento subject's family requested autopsy, but standard tox screen missed digitalis. Future cases should maintain consistent methodology. Tucker whined softly, sensing my distress as I read about their methods for targeting victims. They specifically sought recently widowed women with substantial assets and limited family oversight. Cheryl would identify potential targets through her healthcare contacts, while Daniel would establish relationships through dating services or social activities designed to connect with lonely seniors. The most devastating revelation was their timeline for my murder. They'd originally planned to kill me 6 months ago, but had delayed the execution to allow more time for asset liquidation and evidence disposal. My life had been extended only because they needed additional time to complete their theft, not from any hesitation about committing murder. Subject showing increased awareness of financial discrepancies, Cheryl's most recent notes warned, may need to accelerate timeline. Bank inquiries suggest growing suspicion. Window for natural death narrative closing. They'd been planning to kill me within days of abandoning Tucker and disappearing with my stolen assets. Only their rush to leave town had prevented them from returning to complete the murder. Tucker's desperate digging had literally saved my life by forcing me to discover their crimes before they could return to finish what they'd started. The folder also contained information about Cheryl's aunt, their next intended victim. Detailed financial assessments, medical history, and family dynamics analysis revealed they were already laying groundwork for another murder. The aunt lived alone in a large house, recently widowed, with minimal family contact. She fit their victim profile perfectly. As afternoon faded to evening and Tucker settled closer to my chair, I realized I was looking at evidence of a serial killing operation disguised as elder care fraud. Daniel and Cheryl weren't just thieves. They were predators who murdered vulnerable seniors for profit, using Cheryl's medical expertise to make the deaths appear natural. The weight of this knowledge was almost crushing. Not only had my son planned to steal everything I owned, but he'd collaborated with a professional killer to murder me for inheritance money. The depth of betrayal went beyond anything I could have imagined. But the evidence also represented something powerful, proof of their crimes that could protect other potential victims and ensure justice for those already murdered. Tucker's loyalty and determination had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond our personal tragedy. Tomorrow, I would take this evidence to people who could act on it. Tonight, I would hold my rescued dog close and be grateful that love and loyalty had triumphed over greed and evil, at least this time. The battle wasn't over, but at least now I knew exactly what I was fighting against. The morning sun cast long shadows across my kitchen table as I spread out all the evidence Tucker and I had gathered. Bank records, forged documents, Cheryl's detailed murder plans, and audio recordings of Daniel practicing fake grief calls created an overwhelming mosaic of betrayal and criminal intent. Tucker sat beside my chair, alert and protective, as if he understood we were preparing for war. My first call went to Frank Rodriguez, Robert's army buddy who'd become a detective with the Sacramento Police Department after his military service. Frank had attended Robert's funeral and checked on me regularly afterward, always offering help if I needed anything. Today, I needed everything. Frank, I need to see you immediately. It's about Daniel, and it's much worse than anything you could imagine. Frank's voice shifted immediately to his professional tone. Mia, are you safe right now? Do you need me to come to you? Within 2 hours, Frank sat at my kitchen table reviewing the evidence while Tucker maintained his protective position at my feet. Frank's expression grew darker with each document he examined, his cop instincts recognizing the sophistication of the criminal enterprise I'd uncovered. "This is an amateur hour," Frank said, studying Cheryl's handwritten murder plans. "This woman's a professional predator. The medical knowledge, the psychological manipulation, the systematic approach to victim selection. She's done this before, probably multiple times." Frank contacted his colleagues in Portland and Sacramento, requesting files on suspicious deaths of elderly individuals in circumstances matching Cheryl's pattern. Within hours, we had confirmation of 3 other cases that shared disturbing similarities. Recently widowed women with substantial assets, sudden cardiac deaths with no prior symptoms, and male companions who'd appeared shortly before the deaths. Sarah Morrison from the bank arrived in the afternoon, bringing additional documentation about the forged signatures and fraudulent transactions. Her hands shook slightly as she reviewed Cheryl's notes about manipulating bank personnel through fake medical claims. "We've implemented new protocols because of what happened to you," Sarah said, her voice tight with professional guilt. "Multiple signature verification, mandatory family notification for large withdrawals, and psychological assessment requirements for any claims about customer mental capacity." The evidence was damning, but Frank warned me that gathering proof and building a case for prosecution would require careful coordination with multiple law enforcement agencies. "These people are dangerous, Mia. They've killed before, and they won't hesitate to kill again if they feel cornered. We need to proceed strategically." My next step was contacting Ellen Patterson, an elderly abuse specialist attorney recommended by the County Domestic Violence Center. Ellen had prosecuted similar cases and understood the complex intersection of fraud, elder abuse, and homicide that defined Daniel and Cheryl's crimes. "Your case could prevent other murders," Ellen said after reviewing the evidence, "but we need to locate these suspects before they disappear completely or target their next victim." Frank's police contacts had been tracking Daniel and Cheryl through credit card usage and cell phone records. They'd driven to Seattle immediately after discovering the buried container was missing, probably planning to establish new identities before targeting Cheryl's aunt in Portland. The most challenging aspect of fighting back was rebuilding the family relationships Daniel had poisoned with his lies. I called Janet first, walking her through the evidence systematically and watching her horror grow as she realized how completely she'd been manipulated. "I should have known," Janet said, her voice breaking. "You've never shown any signs of confusion or memory loss." I let Daniel's concern override my own observations because I wanted to believe he was being a good son. One by one, I contacted every family member Daniel had lied to, sharing the evidence and asking for their help in rebuilding the truth about my mental state. Marcus drove down from Sacramento immediately, bringing flowers and a written statement for the police about Daniel's claims of my paranoia and financial irresponsibility. "I'm ashamed I believed him," Marcus said, hugging me tightly while Tucker supervised the reunion. "You've always been the sharpest person in our family. I should have trusted my own judgment, instead of letting Daniel convince me you were declining." Cousin Linda flew in from Oregon, horrified to learn that her concerns about my mental health had been used to justify theft and planned murder. She brought detailed notes about her conversations with Daniel, providing additional evidence of his systematic campaign to discredit me with family members. The church community rallied around me when Father Mackenzie learned the truth about Daniel's lies. "Your faith and strength have been evident throughout this difficult year," he said. "I regret that concern for your well-being made us vulnerable to someone exploiting our care for you." Within a week, I had assembled a team of allies that included law enforcement, legal representation, banking professionals, and family members. Each person brought specific expertise and resources to the fight against Daniel and Cheryl's criminal enterprise. Frank coordinated with the FBI since the crimes crossed state lines and potentially involved multiple victims. The bank implemented special protections on all my remaining accounts, while working to recover stolen funds through insurance claims and asset forfeiture procedures. Ellen prepared legal documents establishing my mental competency and revoking any authority Daniel might claim over my affairs. Medical professionals provided formal assessments confirming my cognitive abilities, creating an official record that contradicted all of Daniel's false claims. Tucker became an unexpected but valuable member of our team. His obvious attachment to me and his role in discovering the buried evidence made him a powerful symbol of loyalty and perseverance that resonated with everyone working on the case. The veterinarian who examined Tucker provided documentation of his neglect and abandonment, adding animal cruelty charges to the growing list of crimes Daniel faced. Tucker's recovery under my care demonstrated the kind of nurturing relationship Daniel had claimed I was incapable of maintaining. As we built our case, Frank's investigation revealed the scope of Cheryl's criminal network. She'd been operating for at least 5 years, targeting elderly victims across multiple states and using various accomplices to gain access to vulnerable seniors. My case represented the first time her operation had been fully exposed. "You've handed us the key to dismantling an entire murder conspiracy," Frank said, reviewing the final evidence package. "Cheryl's notes contain enough information to solve multiple cold cases and prevent future murders." The most gratifying moment came when Ellen confirmed that we'd located and warned Cheryl's aunt in Portland before she could become another victim. The aunt had been showing Cheryl around her house and discussing her late husband's assets, unknowingly providing information for her own planned murder. "Your courage in fighting back saved that woman's life," Ellen told me, "and probably the lives of other potential victims we don't even know about yet." As evening approached and Tucker settled beside my chair, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning when Mrs. Patterson called about a howling dog. The scared, confused widow Daniel had tried to create through lies and manipulation had been replaced by a determined woman, surrounded by allies and armed with truth. But the real fight was still ahead. Frank had confirmed that Daniel and Cheryl were in custody, arrested while attempting to access Cheryl's aunt's financial accounts in Portland. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their prosecution and the final phase of ensuring justice for all their victims. Tucker's steady breathing reminded me that loyalty and love had started this battle. Now truth and justice would finish it. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the Sacramento County Courthouse with Tucker at my feet, watching as Judge Morrison pronounced Daniel guilty on 17 felony charges, including elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted homicide. The gavel's final bang echoed through the courtroom like a door slamming shut on the darkest chapter of my life. Daniel's sentencing hearing had lasted 3 days, with victim impact statements from families across 3 states whose elderly relatives had fallen prey to his partnership with Cheryl Martinez. The Portland case, the Sacramento incidents, and 2 additional murders in Reno that had been solved using Cheryl's detailed notes painted a picture of systematic predation that shocked even experienced prosecutors. "Mr. Chen," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral judgment, "your crimes represent a betrayal not only of your family but of the fundamental trust that binds our society together. Elderly citizens should feel safe from exploitation by their own children. Your actions have damaged that trust in ways that extend far beyond your individual victims." Daniel received 15 years in state prison, without possibility of parole for 10 years. Cheryl, identified as the mastermind and architect of the murder conspiracy, received 12 years with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Both would be required to pay full restitution to all victims, though the financial recovery was just one piece of the justice we'd fought to achieve. The months leading to trial had brought revelations that continued to astound investigators. Cheryl's operation had been active for nearly 7 years, with at least 12 confirmed victims and estimated theft totaling over $2 million. Her medical background had allowed her to identify vulnerable seniors through hospital records, nursing home contacts, and healthcare databases. Tucker had become something of a celebrity during the investigation, featured in news articles as the loyal dog whose determination to protect buried evidence had exposed a multi-state murder conspiracy. The Sacramento Bee ran a front-page story titled "Dog's Loyalty Saves Lives," detailing how Tucker's refusal to abandon his post had prevented additional murders. The financial recovery exceeded all expectations. Bank insurance, asset forfeiture, and liquidation of Daniel and Cheryl's hidden assets returned nearly 90% of my stolen funds. Robert's medals and military memorabilia were recovered from collectors and pawn shops across California, restored to their place of honor in our home. More importantly, the investigation had prompted legislative changes in elder care protection laws. Sarah Morrison worked with banking associations to establish new protocols for protecting elderly customers from family member fraud. Healthcare facilities implemented stricter guidelines for employee access to patient information, closing loopholes Cheryl had exploited to identify victims. My relationships with family members emerged stronger than ever, tempered by shared recognition of how easily trust could be manipulated by skilled predators. Janet moved closer to town, wanting to be more involved in my daily life, not from concern about my competency, but from genuine desire to rebuild the closeness Daniel's lies had temporarily damaged. We learned that love without vigilance can become vulnerability, Janet said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. But we also learned that truth always surfaces when good people refuse to give up searching for it. Marcus established a foundation using part of his inheritance from a grandmother's estate, focused on educating families about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. His hardware store became a resource center for seniors, providing information about financial protection and family safety planning. Father Mackenzie organized community workshops about protecting elderly parishioners from exploitation, using our experience as a teaching tool for recognizing manipulation tactics. The church developed a buddy system pairing younger families with senior members, creating accountability networks that made isolation-based crimes more difficult. Tucker's role in our new life extended far beyond companionship. He'd become a certified therapy dog, visiting nursing homes and assisted living facilities to provide comfort for elderly residents. His gentle nature and remarkable intuition about human emotions made him perfect for helping other seniors who'd experienced trauma or loss. The transformation in Tucker's health and happiness served as a powerful metaphor for recovery from betrayal. When I first found him abandoned and starving, he'd been a broken creature defending the buried evidence that would save both our lives. Now he was a confident, joyful dog who brought comfort to others while maintaining his protective loyalty to me. Ellen Patterson helped me establish the Robert Chen Memorial Foundation for Elder Protection, using recovered funds to support investigation of elder abuse cases and provide legal assistance to seniors facing family member exploitation. The foundation's first major success was helping authorities arrest another caregiver exploitation ring operating in Nevada. The most profound change was in my own understanding of strength and vulnerability. Daniel's crimes had been designed to make me feel helpless and incompetent, dependent on his false protection from dangers he was actually creating. Fighting back had revealed reserves of courage and determination I hadn't known I possessed. Surviving this kind of betrayal requires more than just gathering evidence, Ellen told me during one of our foundation planning meetings. It requires the wisdom to distinguish between genuine love and skilled manipulation, and the courage to trust your own perceptions, even when people you care about question them. The trial's conclusion brought unexpected closure to grief I'd been carrying about Robert's death. Seeing his medals and letters restored to their proper place, knowing that his memory had been honored rather than exploited, provided a sense of completion that Daniel's theft had threatened to destroy forever. Tucker and I had developed new routines that reflected our transformed relationship with trust and safety. Daily walks through the neighborhood allowed us to stay connected with community members who'd supported us through the crisis. Evening sessions reading in Robert's study, with Tucker curled beside my chair, provided quiet time for processing the lessons we'd learned together. The media attention brought unexpected connections with other families who'd faced similar betrayals. Support groups formed organically, bringing together elderly abuse survivors who found strength in shared experiences. These relationships reinforced the understanding that speaking truth about family crimes wasn't betrayal, it was protection for other potential victims. 1 year after Tucker's rescue, we hosted a celebration at our home for everyone who'd helped bring Daniel and Cheryl to justice. Frank Rodriguez brought his family, introducing his children to the dog who'd helped solve a major criminal case. Sarah Morrison presented new banking protocols that had prevented at least 6 other attempted elder fraud cases. As the evening wound down and guests departed, I sat on the back porch with Tucker, looking at the fence corner where he'd dug up the evidence that changed everything. The earth had long since healed over, but the memory of that moment remained vivid. A loyal dog protecting something precious, refusing to abandon hope even when abandoned himself. The deepest lesson from our experience wasn't about financial protection or legal safeguards, though those were important. It was about the fundamental difference between love that protects and manipulation that exploits. True family love creates safety and builds strength. False love creates dependence and steals autonomy. Daniel had counted on my love for him to make me vulnerable to his manipulation, never understanding that real love also demanded accountability. Cheryl had exploited the medical profession's commitment to helping patients, using healing knowledge to cause harm. Both had confused access with entitlement, affection with ownership. But Tucker's loyalty had shown another path entirely. His love asked for nothing except the chance to protect what mattered most. His determination came from devotion rather than desire for control. His strength grew from service rather than domination. As stars appeared in the darkening sky and Tucker settled against my feet, I realized that recovery from betrayal required rebuilding trust carefully and deliberately. Not naive trust that assumed good intentions, but informed trust based on consistent behavior and verified actions. The Robert Chen Memorial Foundation continues expanding its reach, helping elderly abuse victims across the Western states, while educating families about protection strategies. Tucker and I travel regularly to speak at conferences and training sessions, sharing our story to help others recognize and resist exploitation. My relationship with Daniel is finished forever. Some betrayals are too profound to forgive, too dangerous to reconcile. But the relationships destroyed by his lies have been rebuilt stronger, based on shared commitment to truth rather than comfortable illusions. Tucker taught me that loyalty isn't blind obedience. It's intelligent devotion that protects what deserves protection. Love isn't possessive control. It's generous support that builds strength rather than dependence. Family isn't automatic inheritance. It's earned through consistent care and verified commitment. Every morning when Tucker and I walk through our neighborhood, I see elderly residents living independently with dignity and security. Some of them might be alive today because Tucker refused to abandon his post at that fence, because we found the courage to fight back against professional predators, because truth proved stronger than elaborate lies. The greatest victory isn't the recovered money or the criminal convictions, though those matter enormously. The greatest victory is the knowledge that love and loyalty, when combined with courage and wisdom, can triumph over even the most sophisticated evil. Tucker and I learned that sometimes the most important battles begin with the smallest acts of faithfulness. A dog protecting buried evidence. A widow questioning convenient explanations. A community choosing truth over comfortable deceptions. Justice isn't just punishment for wrongdoing. It's protection for the innocent and restoration of broken trust. Our fight didn't just solve crimes. It prevented future victims and restored faith in the possibility that good people can recognize and defeat predatory evil. As I write this story, Tucker sleeps peacefully beside my chair, confident in his safety and secure in his purpose. Tomorrow we'll visit the nursing home, where his therapy work brings comfort to isolated seniors. Next week we'll testify at a legislative hearing about elder protection laws. Next month we'll speak at a conference for law enforcement professionals, learning to recognize family member exploitation. Our journey from betrayal to justice taught us that vulnerability isn't weakness when it's protected by wisdom. Trust isn't foolishness when it's verified by evidence. Love isn't naive when it demands accountability along with affection. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself from harm? How do you balance trust in loved ones with vigilance against manipulation? What signs would make you question someone's claims about your own mental state or capabilities? Thank you for allowing me to share Tucker's story and mine. May your families be built on genuine love that protects, rather than false affection that exploits. May your trust be wise enough to verify intentions through actions, rather than words alone. Remember, those who truly care about your well-being will welcome questions about their motives and transparency about their actions. Those who demand blind trust while discouraging verification have already revealed their real intentions. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to support more stories about overcoming family betrayal. Share it with anyone who might benefit from Tucker's lesson about loyal protection. And comment below about your own experiences with distinguishing genuine care from skilled manipulation. Stay vigilant, stay connected, and never underestimate the power of loyal love to expose even the most sophisticated deception.